Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump says we will be attacking Iran very hard. Welcome to the Wednesday edition. As the U.S. and Iran trade fire once again, with Trump now saying that the regime has taken too long to negotiate a peace deal. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, the president also telling reporters that we've begun taking millions of barrels out of the Strait of Hormuz every night.
Yeah, every night, he says. He says Iran is just now becoming aware of that. We don't know exactly what the president means by that. We also don't know what exactly the U.S. is planning to target, as when questioned by reporters, the president would not get specific whether or not he would be looking at things like power plants, for example. But of course, these strikes that President Trump is now seeming to promise follow the strikes we already saw conducted yesterday in retaliation or response. The military calls it self-defense after that Apache helicopter was downed over the strait. Still
technically in a ceasefire, although he didn't delineate that. We're also trying to chase down what he meant with regard to those barrels of oil going through the strait every night. It's not keeping oil prices lower. We've actually got New York crude and Brent both slightly higher today, and another tough run for stocks here on a CPI day that the president also weighed in on.
4.2% on the headline inflationary figures year over year, the highest we have seen going back 3 years. And yet the president says those numbers are great. He said, and I quote, "I love the inflation."
Right. That was a strange moment that's going to likely end up in a lot of campaign ads. We'll put some context around that. We believe he might have been referring to the core, which came in a little bit cooler than expected. Either way, we have a lot to talk about, Kailey, with Nikki Haley, who is with us in person today in Washington.
Yep, the former ambassador to the UN, former governor of South Carolina, will be here in just a moment, right after we get a check on these markets on the CPI day. For that, we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Indeed, lots of cross currents moving stocks today, and let me hit on quite a few because we got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Yes, geopolitics, major factor here as West Texas Intermediate crude hovers around $91 a barrel. It is up right now by 3%. Barrel of Brent, $93.82, up by 2.6%. We're also looking at a sell-off in tech names. The S&P, let's begin there as a baseline. The S&P 500 index down 1%, down 70 now. Dow Industrials down 618, down 1.2%. But in tech, NASDAQ down 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 1.4%. The sell-off in semis continues. The SOX right now is down 2.9%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. All of this with the VIX holding above 21, a 10-year at 4.53%, the 2-year 4.12%, and the 30-year 5.01%. Gold down 3.2%, 41.23 the ounce, and again, West Texas Intermediate crude just below $91 a barrel, up now by 3.1%. Shares of several large trucking companies are plunging after Amazon announced an expansion of its shipping service that has already shaken the transportation and logistics sector and unsettled investors. Amazon is down 2.1%, but among some of those trucking names, we do have shares of Old Dominion. They are declining now by 5.7%. Saia is down 3.7%, and FedEx Freight recently went public. It is down today by 5.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, outlining it for us perfectly. Thank you so much. Oil prices higher, stocks being dragged down as we look to what seems to be an escalating situation in the Middle East after the U.S. already conducted strikes against Iran yesterday in retaliation for the downed Apache helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump saying that more attacks are on their way. This was the president in the Oval Office earlier today.
We hit them hard yesterday, and we're going to hit them again hard today, in case you miss it, in case you don't turn on your television set. And we'll see what happens with the deal. We were really close to a deal, but they keep tapping us along. They keep playing us for suckers because, you know what? They dealt with some very stupid presidents.
Tapping us along, as the president made clear on Truth Social, that the regime is simply taking too much time in negotiations. And this is where we start our conversation with an important voice in foreign policy and in domestic politics. That would be Nikki Haley, the former ambassador to the United Nations, former governor of South Carolina, chair at Hudson Institute, founder of Stand for America, the advocacy group. It's wonderful to have you with us, Ambassador. Thanks for joining us today on Bloomberg. What are your thoughts then about this active conversation right now Is this the only recourse at the moment to gain more leverage, to hasten an agreement with more strikes?
First of all, I think you always have to look at what your adversary is thinking. Mm-hmm. For them, they're not looking to win, they're looking to survive. So there's a difference. What they think is if they can put enough political pressure on this administration, mm-hmm. if they can put enough economic pressure on this administration, they think the U.S. will cave to a weak deal. This is the same playbook Iran has always done. They stall, they start talking, they make you think you're going to get a deal, they throw cold water on it, and all the while, they're strategizing, they're rearming, they're getting ready for the next conflict. Iran was never going to do a deal. They are never going to get rid of their nuclear ambitions. That's their number one priority. Now they've actually found more leverage with the Strait of Hormuz. And so they don't want to go back to what it was pre-war. They now want to have sovereignty over the strait. They want to make sure that they have the threat of nuclear ambition, and they're going to continue to do that. So I think Trump was right to strike yesterday, but the idea of a deal, that's just not in their cards. One of the surprising things that's not talked about, they have excavated 50 of the 69 tunnels that hold missiles. They're rearming. Now, that's not enough. We've weakened Iran tremendously, but it shows you how they think.
Well, so if Iran is never going to make a deal, and the U.S. is now obviously bogged down in the Middle East for some time in the absence of one, are we coming out on the losing side of this, Ambassador?
No, the only option is to win. Trump has to finish what he started. And the key is stop waiting for a deal, finish it. They're very weak. But what you have to do is go after their finances. What has not, and what the administration should do, is go after Russia and China. Russia right now is providing them drones. China says they want this hostility to end, yet they are providing them man pads for air defense systems. They provided satellite imagery so that you can hit our military bases. If you go after those two, they're providing money. If you go after those two, that's going to take away Iran's ability to help. The second thing is you do have to acknowledge Kharg Island is where they get their revenues from. And at some point, that's going to have to be addressed. But what they're doing is they're creating a distraction. You know, what they've said is, well, Israel is hitting Lebanon. No, Israel's hitting Hezbollah, the terrorist regime in Lebanon. The Lebanese people don't like Hezbollah. And so the key is Iran's going to keep making excuses. They're going to keep creating distractions. At the end of the day, they just want to survive. They just want to make it another day.
Well, you just said a lot, and we need to unpack that. So the United States seizes Kharg Island. That would involve troops, as we understand, in an operation that could bring some risk, but would have, the point you're making, a very direct impact on the economy in Iran. When you say go after China and Russia, is that sanctions?
Yes.
Because we find repeatedly that sanctions don't change behavior with these two.
You have to truly hold them accountable. You have to make sure that they feel the pain. You know, and a lot of that is a lot of the oil that China would buy from Iran. They wouldn't pay Iran directly. They'd do it through shadow accounts through the UAE. You have to go to UAE and say, look, we're working well together. You can't keep helping China help Iran. All of these adversarial things, those are the ones you go after. The point is, if you take your money away from Iran, they can't build nuclear production. They can't mine the strait. They can't fund Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. You know, right now, Iran's talking about now starting to hit Israeli boats in the Red Sea. They're not stopping. Their intention is to keep being aggressive so that they can get what they want, which is sanction relief, to unfreeze the assets, and to try and get the country to see them as someone they need to be dealt with.
Well, as if they heard you, Ambassador, the U.S. just announced sanctions on quote-unquote clandestine banking in China linked to Iran, sanctioning some Chinese and Hong Kong-based individuals. So perhaps that would be a start to what you're getting at here. But I want to go back to something else you mentioned, that's Lebanon and Israel's conduct there. Your point is well understood that it's Hezbollah that they're targeting, but obviously there has been a lot of associated collateral damage. And I wonder if you view Israel as now being actually a very complicating factor in the path forward, if Israel's desires and objectives are diverging from ours.
The U.S. partnering with Israel and what they did to really bring Iran to its knees was so important and so helpful for the national security of the U.S., of Israel, and of the West. So very important that that happened. Israel has to defend itself. But think, just since the April ceasefire, what you've had is the Hezbollah has struck northern Israel over 2,000 times with rockets and drones. What country would put up with that? What country would allow that? So it's not that Israel was doing this, it's Hezbollah. So Iran is trying to make this gray by saying, oh, they're hitting Lebanon. This is not the case. Lebanon is not the issue. It is Hezbollah that's the issue. And you can't let this terrorist activity that is associated with Iran continue. And I think that the U.S. and Israel are partners. I think that while Netanyahu and Trump may disagree at times, I think they agree on a lot more than they disagree. And I think at the end of the day, they both have the same end goal. And so I think that partnership stays strong.
It's amazing that we're having this conversation in June of 2026, remembering the No New Wars mantra that followed the Trump campaign throughout his reelection. There's amazing analysis from our colleagues at Bloomberg Economics found since taking office last January, President Trump has greenlit at least 14,418 military strikes around the globe. I'm just curious, if you were sitting behind the Resolute desk, would you have started this war?
I think that Trump did the right thing. Iran was the weakest they had ever been. If Trump wouldn't have gotten involved, they just would have gone back to doing what they're doing. Keep in mind, you have to know the ideology of that regime. In 1979, they called the U.S. the Great Satan, and they said death to America. Believe adversaries when they say they want to kill you. I personally was targeted. There was a hitman that was actually paid money on U.S. soil to kill me. They are coming to America to kill Americans. This is a regime that finds that their Messiah is coming, and in the meantime, their struggles are supposed to be real, and they're supposed to cause chaos and brutality and murder in the process. You can't change an ideology like that. So they were going to rebuild. They were going to continue to cause harm. They were going to continue to put national security threats on Americans. Over 1,000 Americans have been injured and killed from Iran. We shouldn't even be allowing one. This had to happen. Now he just has to finish what he started.
So you see the national security justification for this particular excursion, as the president has called it. He also has suggested that once this Iran situation is over, whenever that is, he may turn his sights to Cuba. And I wonder if you see that as urgent, what you would expect the U.S. to do when it comes to Cuba and a regime that clearly is teetering on the brink.
In the U.S. put in their national security strategy to make the Western Hemisphere a priority. I think that you saw that with, extracting Maduro in Venezuela. The Venezuelans are going to see so much progress with that. That was something that needed to happen. They deserve freedom, and they're going to get it. What you're seeing in Cuba is a little bit different, because Cuba doesn't have a Delcy Rodriguez, a number two, that can go and run things. Cuba doesn't have a Machado, a head of an opposition, that can go forward. So I don't think that this administration is going to go militarily into Cuba. I think they're just going to put pressure through sanctions and weigh them down. They already stopped the oil that was going from Venezuela to Cuba. They had Mexico pull back on the oil that was going to Cuba, and now Cuba's feeling the pain. They can only take so much pain. What they're going to want is sanction relief. They're going to want to get the Cuban economy going again. But unfortunately, they're going to have to continue to deal with the people that are leading Cuba right now. That's not going to be an issue. That's not going to be something that they can change.
Yeah, there have been questions about whether we could sustain action in two parts of the world militarily like this, because we have a massive buildup in the Middle East that's standing by to do what you're suggesting, which is to finish the job. If in fact we went pedal to the metal and took the advice of Nikki Haley, how long would it take?
Stop negotiating with them. Okay. That's never going to happen. We've lost time. Go finish what you started. I think within a week to 2 weeks.
Is that right?
They could.
Long before the midterms.
Well, a week to 2 weeks, they could. It would take them the amount of time to extract the nuclear enrichment that they have.
Seize
Carg
Island.
You'll have to have special forces there. To go and hold Carg Island is going to obviously take a little bit longer, but this is one where they need to be focused and mission-driven on go after the revenues that are going to Iran, and that's the only way to get rid of the regime. And then The Iranian people have no way to defend themselves. They've killed thousands of people in the streets and made examples of them. What's happened in the past is the U.S. has actually helped countries so that the people can rise up. That's the way that this is going to end, is when the people feel safe enough to rise up that they can go and take their country back.
If the U.S. were to pursue the course of action you're describing, do you believe it would be prudent for the president to go to Congress first? Do you see that constitutional necessity that he has consistently denied is necessary?
I always think you need to go to Congress. One, you need the buy-in of Congress. You need the buy-in of the American people. You need to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you know. And yes, it's just good practice to go to Congress with more. This administration has done a lot by executive order. The danger in that is the next administration, if it's not a Republican, all of that gets reversed. And then we're swinging the pendulum. That's not good for the American people. Congress needs to step up. There are a lot of things Congress could be doing, but right now we're hearing a lot of talking and not a lot of action.
The political pendulum also swings as we watch the primary season unfold, and there was a state you know a lot about that was, of course, voting yesterday in South Carolina. The president's endorsements have been on the line quite a bit here more recently, and they paid off last evening, particularly in the race for governor, the primary for governor. Pamela, Yvette, I'm curious your thoughts on this and what it looks to be the end of a couple of political careers, including Nancy Mace and someone who you endorsed and endorsed you back in Ralph Norman. What transpired last night, and is it good for your party?
Well, I think, first of all, primaries are always good for our party. I think that it's very important that you have debate, that you have, them touching as many hands as they can and really getting their message out. So I think having a full primary was a great thing. The press has been covering that Nancy Mace was a factor, and because of the Trump endorsement she lost. She was never a factor in this race. She was always in 5th place. She was never going anywhere.
That was a tough
she
finish.
knew that, and South Carolina knew that. So, she laid her bed. She's now laying in it. That's what she's doing. Ralph Norman, who I respect and love, we go way back. He does what he says he's going to do. He's got real clarity. Certainly I wish he would have made it into the runoff, but he was always pushing, and then you had Evett and Wilson in there. And so, look, it's the power of the Trump endorsement. Evett wouldn't have made it in the runoff without the Trump endorsement. So his endorsement is strong. It does move the ball. And, we just have to make sure that who we elect in a primary is who we want to vote for in a general.
Well, and to that point, I wonder if you think the president is making the correct endorsement choices, even if we look beyond South Carolina to say somewhere like Texas, where Ken Paxton is now the one who is going to have to try to hold a Senate seat in Republican hands.
It's going to cost a lot more money for Republicans to hold that seat. I do think we'll hold the Texas seat, but it's just not Republicans. Look at Graham Plattner in Maine. It's amazing to me. I always say it's important to understand that in a primary, you make your choice. In a general election, you're given the choice. You have to choose between the two. But in America, typically only 15% of Americans vote in a primary. So what you're getting is the extreme of both sides. So by the time most Americans go to vote, they're having to choose between two extremes. It's because we don't talk about primaries in high schools. Our kids don't know that. They know to vote in November. They know to do that, and they do. But until we start talking about the importance of primaries, and until Americans see that that's actually the race that matters, you're going to have the Paxton race, you're going to have the Plattners, you're going to have those that make us kind of uncomfortable. But, all in the name of getting a majority, let's get the right, good people in there so that we can start getting things done. But more than that, let's look at what's not getting done. You look at the debt that America has right now. What has Congress done about that? So you want to talk about a war, but why aren't they talking about balancing a budget? We're $39 trillion in debt. We're going to be $40 trillion in the fall. That's unacceptable. That's like the U.S. taking in $5 trillion a year and spending $7 trillion a year. Now we're 100% over GDP. The last two recessions, we had a buffer. If we have another recession, there will be no stimulus. There will be no tax breaks. You aren't going to have a cushion to do anything with. That is something Congress can address now, and they've yet to do it. Social Security is going to run out in 6 years. Every U.S. Senate candidate needs to be asked, what are you going to do about it? Because 75 million Americans will be affected by that. You don't wait until that falls on us and do a quick Band-Aid of a deal. It's something I talked about in the campaign, was reforming entitlements. You have to do that. In a few years, 15% of our federal outlays are going to be interest. That's not okay.
Well, I'm just listening to you speak, Ambassador, and I'm wondering if you plan to travel to campaign for candidates that you decide to support, whether it's in the South Carolina runoff or nationally, and what your plans are beyond this midterm cycle. We all remember when you said your time would come. Is it coming in this next round?
First of all, I'm going to help any candidates that I can. You know, we have been helping Susan Collins raise money. I plan on going to Maine and campaigning for her, doing that. When we see a good candidate, I mean, that race matters to us so much. And she's been such a remarkable senator. You know, it shouldn't go overseen that she's never missed a vote. Never missed a vote. And regardless of where her views are, she's respected, she's a hard worker, she's come out of tough races, but we need to make sure she wins again. We can't take this for granted. So yes, I will be out there in elections helping Republicans. That's something I'm always going to do. In terms of my future, you know, I'm going to keep talking about the things that matter. I'm going to talk about foreign policy. I'm going to talk about the debt. I'm going to talk about the need for us to self-correct. I think that's what I can do. You know, I talk to a lot of business leaders now about how you manage business in, you know, this world that we're in, and that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not going to look forward. I'm not running in 2028. That's not something that I'm interested in, but my voice is going to always be there. I think it's too important for us to stay silent in times like this.
Well, and as you talking about foreign policy, something that you were vocal about in 2024, President Trump, as Joe alluded to earlier, was very much not running that kind of campaign, and yet he does seem to be running that kind of presidency, much more foreign policy oriented. And I wonder if you expect that trajectory is going to continue, where that once again is back at the forefront of conversation.
Well, I think, you know, you can say no new wars, but the reality of Ukraine and Russia is there. Russia invaded a free country. That's something that we can't step away from. The reality of the threat from Iran on our national security, you can't walk away from that. So yes, in a campaign you can say no new wars, but reality hits you in the face when you get to that leadership position and you have to make those decisions. And I think he's having to make those decisions now.
It's a pretty dangerous time that we're living in and talking through with you, Ambassador. And there's a big question about who should be running the nation's intelligence apparatus. This is a big problem on Capitol Hill. FISA expires, it looks like, on Friday because lawmakers need more than Bill Pulte. They want a permanent name that the president might announce. He says he's working on one, but Pulte will be on the job later this month. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, I think Trump has made it clear that he's going to put a permanent person in there. That person needs to have experience. Our intelligence is everything. I can tell you from when I was at the United Nations, the profiles of our adversaries, knowing what they're saying, knowing what they're doing, knowing the threats that face us are hugely important. It would be irresponsible for Congress not to renew FISA. I can't stress enough how that keeps Americans safe. And regardless of what you think about Pulte, FISA needs to continue, and Trump needs to put someone qualified in there that can make Congress feel like they can move forward. So both of those things need to happen.
Just quickly, is it also irresponsible to have someone even in an acting capacity who's used non-public mortgage data to go after perceived enemies of the president?
I think that what we want is transparency. Let us know who's serving us. What are they doing for us? Be transparent about it, and what's your end goal? I think that there are, cabinet members who are doing a great job. I think there are other cabinet members who we may not know as much of what they're doing. Open it all up. Let the American people see. At the end of the day, Americans want to know that government's working for them. They still don't trust government. They don't trust our agencies. They don't trust Congress. They don't trust elected officials. Americans deserve better. They're paying higher in groceries, higher in energy, higher in insurance, all of these things. Kids can't afford their rent. If all of that's going to happen, it makes an American public more resentful, and it makes them more angry at why people aren't working for them. And my advice is, look, we're going to be okay, but do your part. Step up. Don't vote for somebody because they look good in a picture or hold a baby well. You know, are they fighting for you? And if they're fighting for you, fight for them. But if they're not, it's time to turn the leaf and get someone else.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. She's now chair at Hudson Institute, also former ambassador to the United Nations and former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. And now we want to get a quick check on the markets once again, because as we just discussed with the ambassador, it is a volatile situation in the Middle East as the U.S. looks like it may be on the brink of once again attacking Iran. So for the latest on how markets are reacting, we turn to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey. And right now we got oil higher, stocks lower. Do want to begin with a developing story involving SpaceX. Now, sources tell Bloomberg SpaceX's IPO has attracted demand for more than 4 times the available shares. Banks are expected to stop taking orders from institutional investors after the market closes today at 4 p.m. Wall Street time. SpaceX's IPO is set to price tomorrow and then trade the following day. Start setting the ticker on your monitors. SPCX will be the ticker. It'll trade on NASDAQ. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all very much in the red. Low of the day right now on the S&P at 73.04. We're down 81 now. Drop there of 1.1%. A flare-up in geopolitical tensions, spurring a rally in oil. Also, tech names continue to sell off. The Dow is down 654 points now. That is a drop of 1.3%. S&P keeping it all in context, down 1.1%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 1.4%. The NASDAQ 100 Index down 1.5%. The VIX up 8.7% right now. The VIX trading above 21. The 10-year 4.54%. The 2-year 4.13%. And the 30-year 5.02%. Spot gold now down $148 the ounce. Spot gold down 3.5%. $41.12 the ounce. While West Texas Intermediate crude up 3.6%, $91.35 a barrel. Brent $94.22 barrel of Brent right now, higher by 3%. Super Micro computer shares are plunging. Right now we've got Super Micro down 19.8%. It plans to raise $7 billion through a package of equity offerings to buy the components needed to fulfill customers' orders for the company's AI servers. Oracle coming up after the close of trading, and we do have Oracle shares ahead of earnings, down now by just about 1.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. We'll be back with Charlie and the markets coming up in just about 20 minutes time here, about 15 minutes on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us on the Wednesday edition. After our fascinating and wide-ranging conversation, we covered a lot of ground with Nikki Haley, Kailey, from Iran to the primary season. We want to stick with foreign policy for a moment and assembled our political panel for everything that we just heard. This, of course, is the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Rick Davis is here, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stonecourt Capital. And we're joined by the first time by Democratic strategist Matt Robison, former campaign manager from the great state of Massachusetts. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. And Rick, I'm deeply curious your thoughts on the justification for this war that we heard from Nikki Haley. She is firmly behind the president, and even then some. Sounded a little bit like Senator Lindsey Graham, the finish the job camp. As the president today says, we will start attacking Iran again very hard today. Do you agree with Nikki Haley, and what would finishing the job actually look like?
Yeah, I was actually very impressed that she took as strong a stand as she did. I mean, she's always been a defense hawk. Part of what I love about Governor Haley, it's great to see her on Bloomberg. It's nice to have her back in the dialogue. Look, I mean, her two pillars, sanctions on Russia and China, absolutely the right thing to do. The president's been cowed by China on rare earths, so he's been hesitant to want to really use that card. But the Senate has given him lots of room with Russia and China to do what they need to do, not just in this war, but in the Russia conflict in Ukraine. And then the second pillar, Carg Island, is really representative of a lot of the things she talked about. She didn't get much into the details, but sounded like ground troops to take out the uranium was one of her options. And that means a significant increase in the kinetic end of this war. Look, at the fundamental core of it, she said the right thing, which is you can never get a deal that you can trust with this regime. Ultimately, you'll need regime change, which means the people of Iran need to be given the tools to take control of their own destinies. And I thought she had a very clear-minded view of how to actually solve the problem rather than just kick the can.
Well, and with that notion of perhaps diplomacy not ultimately having a chance at prevailing, Matt, I wonder if even if you disagreed with the initiation of this conflict to begin with, if it is now the best course of action for American interests, both in terms of our national security, but also our economic interests, for the U.S. military to just try to finish this as best they can.
Well, Kailey, I mean, I defer to the ambassador's vast expertise on these matters. I will say that it's hard to see how sanctioning funding and logistical sources from China and Russia would really change behavior, which is an issue that came up in the last segment. And it's really hard for me to see how hitting Karg Island, trying to degrade the Iranian regime's income, would help with the looming price bomb that is facing Americans. One thing I can predict is that the notion of boots on the ground is going to lead to huge congressional pushback. The fact that majorities in both chambers of Congress have now voted to severely curtail U.S. military action in Iran tells you everything you need to know about how realistic it is that Congress would get behind putting boots on the ground. I'm not sure I understand how President Trump would get congressional authorization for that, as the ambassador said he would need to do. So I think the real issue from a purely political standpoint is prices are going through the roof. That's the number one issue for voters heading into the fall. We have a looming depletion of key inventories of feed-ins to commodities that Americans depend on, that we're paying through the nose for. That's the issue that should be really keeping the White House up at night. I'm not sure how escalating the conflict is going to address any of that.
Rick, what do you think about the congressional side of this? The ambassador was very direct. He said the administration has to get the permission of Congress to finish the job. And some would say that it's just too late, Rick, that the White House has done so much on its own without Congress, and knowing that these war powers resolutions have passed, that they would never get the votes. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I don't think in a situation like this it's ever too late. Yes, the president did not sell this war to the American public or to our allies and friends around the world. And that was a critical mistake. This go-alone strategy is now bearing out some of the problems that it has inherent with it. But I lived through the surge in Iraq where everyone thought the war was lost and we were going to just, sort of slowly turn tail and run. And we convinced the American public and Congress to support a surge in Iraq. And this is not significantly different from that dynamic. It was not a popular thing. John McCain ran his primary in New Hampshire on the surge. I mean, like, talk about a very unpopular concept in New Hampshire. But he won, and he got the support of the people and Congress, and that turned the tide of the war there. So the question is, do you want to take some sacrifices? Do you want to get out there and make this a political issue? It's killing the president now. He ought to try to make it better.
Well, and of course, this is what the ambassador was getting at, the idea that you can campaign on no new wars all you want. A campaign sometimes is going to be very different than the reality of actually governing. On the subject of campaigns to govern, though, Matt, we also obviously talked to her about the South Carolina gubernatorial primary, in which Nancy Mace came in a resounding 5th place. Ralph Norman also obviously did not advance. Pam Yvette, who received the endorsement of President Trump, did so. And I wonder if you read into that at all in terms of the strength of the Trump endorsement being on show once again, or if, as a campaign strategist, you see this as a result of perhaps just some weak campaigns.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think we've had ample evidence at this point that Trump's hammerlock on the Republican Party is as strong as it ever was. We've seen it in Indiana. We've seen it in state after state. I think, the issue for Republicans is that that kind of sends them out further and further on the branch away from where the mainstream of American voters are. And again, we alluded in the last segment to what the polling is telling us and what special election evidence is telling us about where American voters are, the amount of enthusiasm that Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents are bringing into the midterm elections. In the 117 special elections that we've had since the last cycle, there's been a move toward Democrats in turnout of 5.6 percentage points. So it's all well and good for Trump to exert this kind of influence in South Carolina, in other solid red Republican territory, but it's not in the Republican Party's long-term strategic interest. And Democrats, my side, aren't too upset about it in terms of our midterm prospects.
Really interesting. Got a minute left, Rick. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I don't know how much of the turnout is a factor of enthusiasm or whether or not it's just demographics. Matt knows well that Democratic voters are more likely to turn out. They're more college educated. They have a voting history of turning out in midterms and special elections, wherein these Republicans don't. And so that is an adjustment that you have to make on your own and figure out how it affects your campaign. But it all portends for a raucous November election.
We are in for one heck of a general election season. And with the help of Rick Davis and Matt Robison, we're going to have it covered for you. Gentlemen, thank you. Great panel, great conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. We have much more ahead here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Worst level of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. Stock market losses are intensifying. Right to the numbers here. Lots of factors for the sell-off. The S&P down 93 now to 72.93. That is a drop of 1.3%. We got a flare-up in geopolitical tensions. That is spurring a rally in oil, and stocks are selling off. Right now we've got the S&P down 1.3%. Again, lower by 92 points. The Dow, 50,108. It is down 762 points. That is a drop of 1.5%. NASDAQ down 1.6%. Tech names being hit hard again today. The NASDAQ 100 index down 1.6%. And the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, down now by 3.1%. All of this with the VIX closing in on 22 amid geopolitical tensions. The 10-year at 4.55%. The 2-year 4.13%, and the 30-year currently at 5.03%. Gold is down 3.6%, 41.05 the ounce. Crude, 91.59 a barrel on WTI, up by 3.8%. Barrel of Brent, 94.35, up now by 3.2%. Starbucks may have a deal brewing in Japan. Sources tell Bloomberg Starbucks is considering options for its Japanese business, including a stake sale. This would follow the disposal of a majority interest in its China operations. Starbucks shares up now by 1.1%. Again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all lower, oil higher, S&P down 1.2%, NASDAQ 100 down 1.7%, and the SOX down 3.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie, thanks. He'll be back in just about 20 minutes. Top of the hour as we kick off Bloomberg Business Week Daily with another look at the markets here. Keeping our eyes on the Wednesday trade as we talk politics here in Washington. The President of the United States held a big signing ceremony a little bit earlier. You knew reconciliation passed, the $70 billion for ICE and Border Patrol now signed into law. And the next stop on the road brings us, Kailey, to FISA 702. And the president is now starting to get involved, knowing that we've talked to a number of lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, who have quote unquote heartburn over the idea of Bill Pulte as DNI. And that's been slowing things down on the renewal front. Vote set for Friday. Now the president is asking not only for a bit of patience in naming a permanent DNI, but also a short-term solution here, essentially kicking the can to buy time to come up with the right candidate.
Yeah, another short-term extension after we've already seen short-term extensions previously, knowing the original bipartisan deal was to extend this key warrantless surveillance program for 3 years. That all fell apart with the tapping of Bill Pulte. But perhaps the suggestion here that he is looking for an alternate candidate to serve on a permanent basis as opposed supposed to be something of an olive branch to concerned Democrats. So let's get into all of this now as we turn to Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Congresswoman, welcome back to Bloomberg. It's good to see you. I don't know if you think that this short-term extension is possible by even Friday. At this point, is the president doing enough to make it clear that Bill Pulte will eventually have some separation from the nation's intelligence services?
Look, I think that we have to extend FISA. To me, as a New York Republican in a post-9/11 world, I think there's a few things that are more critical at this moment, and to make sure that that FISA authority remains with the intelligence community. It has stopped terror attacks. It has provided necessary information to keep our country safe. And it is critical that it does get extended, particularly when you think about all that is happening this year. It's not just the 25th anniversary of September 11th. It is, you have the World Cup starting this weekend. You have the Knicks. You have America 250 events coming. There's just so much activity, not to mention the conflict with Iran. So there's a lot happening right now where we need to make sure that our intelligence community has that as a tool, because it's just so critically important.
We've been discussing the fact that it's not top of mind or in front of Americans the way a TSA shutdown might be, where you've got lines at airports. There's a point of pressure here. Not everyone knows what FISA 702 is. What would you tell someone in Staten Island who asked you, who cares what happens if it expires? What would we lose?
Yeah, and part of the reason why the average person doesn't know what FISA is because it is so heavily classified, and you can't even publicly give examples of the types of things that have been stopped because of it. Although there were reports in 2024 there was a potential attack at the Taylor Swift concert, for example, that was thwarted because of FISA. But basically, it is a tool that is used, a surveillance tool that the intelligence community uses to track foreign individuals not on U.S. soil, and that is how they conduct a lot of this investigation. Now, the controversy with some of the members of Congress, has been that if that foreign individual outside the United States communicates with somebody who is in the United States and is an American citizen, those are the privacy concerns that some of the members have. But I think that at minimum, we should be able to do a short-term extension of the existing law. There's still negotiations that are happening in terms of whether there should be a warrant or not a warrant if an American citizen inadvertently got swooped up in an investigation of a foreign individual. So I think that, but we can't let it go dark. I think that's the bottom line for people like me who are very concerned about what could happen if FISA were to go offline and that tool was taken away. And remember, there were a number of reforms, about 50 reforms that were added about 2 years ago when FISA was reauthorized. And so there were already very significant reforms. And remember, President Trump had been one of the biggest critics of FISA because he felt that
used against him.
Exactly. And he's the one saying we need to, we cannot let this thing expire, and that there were reforms. And so he's advocating for, and hopefully can convince some of those members who have been kind of reluctant right now to support it.
Well, I wonder what you make of the president's timing decisions here, tapping Bill Pulte as acting DNI just before FISA expires, having the DOJ announce this anti-weaponization fund just before you're trying to get through a massive budget reconciliation package. Is he just making it more difficult for those of you who stood up on Capitol Hill?
I think maybe it wasn't the most politically savvy things to be saying when you're trying to get certain things done. You got to love President Trump for his honesty, right? He's very blunt. He's out there. He's transparent. He says what he feels. He does what he thinks is the right thing. I think that it probably was not the best timing if he truly wants Pulte to have that position. With that said, I think that a lot of members are looking to see if we could get somebody a little more qualified specifically in the national security space. We think, and I think that that's probably where this is going to end up. It'll probably be somebody else, and I think is concern about that, and he needs to address it over the next 24 hours or so for us to get this, I think, across the finish line.
Before we move on, though, should people brace for at least a temporary expiration, or could this still
I'm hopeful.
saved by Friday?
Look, I'm hopeful that we will get the job done.
Yeah.
I've spoken with folks over at the White House, folks at with the speaker, and I mean everyone understands how critical this is. And we've been told to not rush out of here. Usually the last vote of the week, everyone's already planning. It's a mass exodus. Yeah. We need to stick around. I'm prepared to stick around, and we need the members to stay here. And I think that the attendance does become a problem, though. And I think that's irresponsible. I think the members need to stay here until FISA is extended. And a short-term extension, I think, probably is the only solution at this time, considering how late it is. And the Democrats have already said they're not going to help at all. So if they're not going to help at all, we need every Republican to stay here and just do that temporary extension to make sure that it stays online.
Well, as we consider what else the president is grappling with here, he announced in the Oval Office earlier that the U.S. is going to be attacking Iran very hard, to use his words, after we saw the response yesterday to the downing of the Apache helicopter. In your mind, is it in the best interest of the United States to just go forward with the military option in the absence of real progress on diplomacy?
Look, it's hard for me to say without having all the information in front of me of what the military, what the intelligence is saying. I do believe that Iran has been dragging its feet, and if they're not going to come to a deal, then we're going to have to deal with them in a different way. And the president has made these threats, and if he's making these threats that they're going to take military action if there's no progress in negotiations, I think he needs to follow through with that. I think you can't. I think you can't bluff in this situation, and it's too serious. This needs to be resolved. And as Secretary Rubio says, it's got to be resolved one way or the other. And so I think that it's good to be pushing Iran, but at some point he's going to have to make a decision if they're going to just use military force to get the Strait back and to try to put an end overall to their capabilities, any nuclear capabilities. I think it's in Iran's best interest to make a deal, but they also know, with an election coming up, that time is on their side in a sense, right? Even though the president says that's not true, and I think the president is working on his own timeline. He may not be as concerned about the midterms as some of the other, some of us are. But at the end of the day, we need to do what's in the best interest to ensure that Iran does not have that nuclear weapon, that the Strait opens up, the oil begins flowing again, and that that enriched uranium gets turned over to somebody. It may not be the United States, but maybe an intermediary, but it's got to get out of the hands of the Iranian regime.
Well, we saw evidence today that for a third month, this war or conflict, whatever you want to call it, is pushing prices higher, and look no further than the gas station. I noticed today, knowing you were going to join us, New York is actually above the national average. Nationally, $4.15. I think you're at $4.42 in New York. President was asked today about prices, and you might have heard his response by now. It's a little bit difficult to tell exactly what he meant with his answer, but let's listen. He had reporters in the Oval Office a short time ago.
The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. We've been taking out millions of barrels of oil. Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now.
Interesting. I love the inflation is going to be in campaign ads, whether it's out of context or not, right, for months ahead. It's unclear how he meant that. I think he's suggesting that because it's going to fall, he's getting a kick out of these numbers now. I'm not sure. What does it mean for your voters, though, and for your reelection campaign?
Well, I don't love inflation. My constituents don't love inflation. I don't love high gas prices. My constituents don't like high gas prices. I do agree with one thing that the president did say is that it's going to come down, and it's going to come down quickly as soon as this is over. Remember, President Trump brought gas prices below $3, and it was the first time we saw that in 4 years. Under Joe Biden, it had gone all the way up to $5. It always stayed roughly between like $4 and $5 the entire 4 years. And so I do believe that he has the ability to drastically bring down those prices, but we need to get out of this. And I think that that's the key here. How is that going to happen? Because the negotiation is taking longer than we anticipated. And I think that, we just need to see how because even if it were to open today, the Strait, it could take months for those prices to still reflect. Sure. And, still some of the open tariff issues that we have, there's still a lot of questions there. And so that's coming into play as well. I think long term, what he's doing today will have a positive impact long term. But for the short term, it's been a little bit of a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
Well, the president just posted on Truth Social, Congresswoman, that he last month secretly directed the military to support oil tankers and other commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. He says, quote, "Today I am pleased to announce this effort has resulted in more than 100 million barrels of oil making its way through the strait and into the open market. More than 200 commercial ships have safely traveled through the strait." So perhaps we were secretly doing Project Freedom all along, but I would imagine this rings as good news to you.
Well, that is welcome news. And I think, again, what you're seeing, and this is why I think prices, when this gets resolved, it will come down. Because, look, we've ramped up domestic energy production. Now we have a much better relationship with Venezuela, right? And we're benefiting from that as well in terms of oil. And then now you're going to see the strait opening up and these barrels getting through. That's about 20% of the global market. Yeah. And obviously, the global market is what really affects those prices, not just that America's producing more, so, the prices come down for us. It's a global issue. And so I think that, these three things combined will be better in the long run. Now, New York is a different story. Now, why you say New York is above the national average is, honestly, it's because of a lot of terrible policies at the state level. I mean, New York has crushed the energy sector, and electric bills have skyrocketed. Gas prices for your heating your home have skyrocketed. And
your state taxes are the reason why a gallon costs more than the national average.
It's the state taxes, but it's also 26% of the energy supply or electricity supply was at Indian Point Power Plant, right? And they have closed that down in the state of New York, and now that's putting a lot of pressure on the industry. So I think that New York, sadly, like California, above average on most things when it comes to cost, and that's because a lot of the local state issues that come into play that affect it. Now, I've also temporarily introduced a bill to temporarily suspend the federal gas tax.
That's right.
I think that's good for commuters, and it's also good. It's for diesel as well. That'll help out farmers. It'll help out truckers and shipping industry. I think that's something we can do temporarily just to ease the pain at the pump until this gets resolved.
Well, it's great to spend a little time with you, Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, Republican from New York. You in the skybox or courtside tonight?
I'm going to be watching from the comfort of my little TV, But, we got the congressional baseball games tonight.
That's
true.
Baseball games
big
tonight.
Sports day today for New Yorkers.
It's Bloomberg.